Hey everyone, my name is Mike Katz. I'm EVP of T-Mobile for Business, and welcome back to Taking Care of Business. I am so thrilled today to be joined by Kishen Mangat. Kishen is Cisco's VP of Mobility and Automation with a strong focus on 5G. In other words, he's pretty much the face of 5G at Cisco. He's also a serial entrepreneur. He was one of the co-founders of a company called Broadhop that was acquired by Cisco in 2013, which is where he was led to today, which is how he got to where he is today. So I am so excited, Kishen, that you're here with us today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Mike. It's great to be here. Really enjoy working with you and T-Mobile.
Well, we're lucky to have you as part of our extended team. I wanted to kind of jump right into it with 5G. 5G is obviously a big buzzword. You see lots of advertising around 5G. We're talking a lot about 5G, and I want to talk about 5G as a game changer specifically in the business space, because one of the things that I frequently talk about is if you go back 10 years and think about the world before 4G, and think about how much of our world has changed just in these last 10 years with 4G and LTE technology. The fact that, we can do everything we want from our smartphone. We can call an Uber, we can, have food delivered to our house, we can get a date on our phone. Just all of these things that were invented in the 4G era that we never would have forecasted 10 years ago. Like when you think about this 5G era, like what gets you excited about 5G as we transition from this technology to the next one?
Yeah, I think your 4G example is great because it's really all about how we made communication and applications, experiences pervasive for the consumer through smartphones. But what we're looking at with 5G is so much bigger because it's taking that same idea of pervasiveness or critical mass in terms of connectivity and experience, but applying it in a much broader realm. So think about basically connecting everything, having an on-demand network experience, and to your point, specifically around business. If you look at what's happened in business IT over the last 10 years, it's been completely transformed by the cloud and by this, utility-based approach to computing. And 5G really is that utility-based approach to connectivity and to networks. And there's a number of different technology innovations that are driving that. But basically, you can get anything connected to the network with 5G that really is going to fuel and drive digitization for enterprises as well as small and medium businesses.
You hear a lot of talk about the kinds of capabilities that are coming with 5G, whether it's huge, massive download speeds. What from your perspective, what are some of the things that you think are really going to be transformed experientially because of 5G, and what are like some of the key ingredients that you see 5G bringing that just what wasn't networks weren't capable of in an LTE era?
Mike, this is one of the things that I think is only partially understood. I think that there's a lot of talk when it comes to 5G about low latency, and obviously that's really cool and super important. And I think when the applications get there, then customers will be asking for low latency, and they already are in some pockets. I mean, if you look at gaming, if you look at virtual reality entertainment, some of your factory automation use cases. I mean, low latency is a real thing. And obviously we know about high speed. And those are things that 5G is delivering upon. But the part that is misunderstood is what it takes to actually deploy, build, operate a network, and to create a service such that it becomes pervasive. And that's really all about automation. And so that's one of the biggest things that we did that's different in 5G than 4G was, number one, the network itself is software rather than hardware-based network devices, and it's built from the ground up with automation. So what that means is that we can build out the network more quickly, which is exactly how we're going to connect everything, to create that cloud-like experience for network consumption.
As a business is thinking about 5G, what would you tell them in terms of what to expect out of 5G in the short term, maybe the next couple of years, versus what they should expect and how they should think about 5G, several years or 5 years down the road?
Yeah, I mean, some of the immediate things have begun to happen. I don't think businesses have completely tapped into this, but think about a company that makes automobiles, Tesla or General Motors, Ford. They're already now developing connected cars, and they're using the LTE network to connect those cars back to their services. But really, that's just the tip of the iceberg. So that machine-to-machine communication, any business customer that sells a connected device can think about the 4G network or the 5G network as something that can be connected when you boot up the device, or when you send some kind of a communication device to your customer. The second area that I think will probably be more medium term is around factory automation and the sort of more of what we refer to as OT, or operational technology. So that could be anything from a manufacturer to a mining company, oil and gas. I mean, you have a wide range of different applications where connectivity and technology is actually part of either manufacturing their good or delivering their service. John Deere is a good example, where they have connected tractors and so on that send telemetry data back to to help enhance the product. And then I think further out, and maybe even more medium term for small and medium customers, is looking at every time there's a connectivity opportunity. LAN and Wi-Fi is the workhorse. Obviously, Cisco is a big player in the LAN and Wi-Fi space, and we know that that's going to continue for a very long time. But what 5G is opening up for small, medium, and large businesses is a whole mindset or mentality around right tool for the job. So it's not Wi-Fi 6 or 5G. It's which is the right technology to get our new applications up and running as quickly as possible. And I think we're in an uber competitive world, and the kind of this you and me being in this industry for a long time, we're used to the speed at which technology moves. And now with digitization taking over in all industries, that same kind of technology speed is hitting every industry, and so you really need to be able to have the right solution right away.
Yeah. I know this is pretty much an impossible question, so I'm not going to hold you to the answer or anything. But I talked at the beginning about things like Uber and Airbnb, and really just the world of applications kind of being the thing that defined LTE. If you were to place a bet on looking back at this industry 5 or 10 years from now, what do you think the things that we'll be talking about that have defined this 5G era will be, the kinds of use cases that define this era?
Well, there's a huge headwind that we have, from the perspective of the kind of question that you just asked me, and it is a little bit of a tough question, because when you think about 4G, we put iPhones and smartphones in the hands of billions of consumers, and so it really went from being cellular technology was about voice to all of a sudden it's this mainstream. It really mainstreamed the internet. And so for those of us who are in the industry, we were already using different, websites and web applications to do things, but the way that it made it so easy for consumers, really made 4G a special transition. I think some of the things that are going to define 5G will maybe, they won't be as consumer relevant right away. I do think having more infotainment services for consumers, whether they're flying, driving in a train. I think those experiences will become richer for consumers. Obviously AR, VR. There's lots of hype around that, but that'll define the consumer segment. But the biggest advantages are going to be realized for businesses and by businesses in terms of pervasively connecting their enterprise in whatever shape or form it is with its end constituents and customers and devices. So it really is about the business, and I'm just afraid that that I don't want people to feel like 5G is a letdown. I think it's really an enabling technology.
Yeah, I mean, come on, Kishan. I thought you were going to tell me about when you and I are going to be driving in our completely automated self-driving cars, talking to each other like on hologram phones.
Well, you can tell that that I'm a technologist, Mike, in the sense that I have to speak honestly about what I really see, but certainly it is, and it is helping all of those industries. And I think it goes back to my message around automation, but more as core technology constructs versus killer use cases that change everybody's life
Yeah,
tomorrow,
yeah.
Jetsons, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's an unfair question because the reality is I think just like 10 years ago, and this is to me this is kind of the cool thing about 5G is we don't know what's going to be invented, and it's probably going to be invented in somebody's garage or somebody's dorm room. The next thing that leverages these amazing capabilities that defines the next generation of this mobile technology, which I think is so cool.
Well, I mean, that's what makes it so, incredibly critical and impressive, what T-Mobile has accomplished. And I want to toot your horn a little bit, as long as, and hopefully Cisco's as well, as long as we're here. But, by getting, there's something really, and again, I don't want to get too techy, but there's something really unique about what T-Mobile has been able to build, in terms of the spectrum that is available and the way that it's been built out, that where the T-Mobile network from a 5G perspective really is more pervasive. I mean, we were able to turn up the nationwide 5G network, literally, years before other players in the market. And so, to your point, by making that technology available, it's for us, hopefully our constituents, our customers, our partners make it easy on us to go out and invent those new things, because it is this enabling platform, to provide this fast, low latency connectivity, and sky's the limit. So I guess the message to the industry is get out there and go do stuff with it. Go experiment, and go fail. Frankly, I mean, I think that's what's really gonna gonna make this a huge opportunity with 5G.
Yeah. Well, one last question and relative to 5G, just as long as we're still doing the horn tooting. T-Mobile recently just launched this thing called standalone 5G or 5G SA. Can you talk about what that is and why it's a big deal?
Yeah, so non-standalone 5G means that you attach the new 5G radio to the 4G core. And we did that actually a couple of years ago with you guys. I mean, we did that very early. And that was cool and that was important. It was a stepping stone. But then you're saddled with the maximum scale and speed and throughput of your 4G network. You're still scaling out the data center capacity to support that 5G network via 4G technology. I mean, if you think about low latency and high speed, it really means getting the network closer to the user, which means that we can't be hamstrung by the old technology methods. So that's number one. That's really important about 5G SA. It's based on cloud technology. It's built with automation from the ground up. But then the other, and this is what's really unique again for T-Mobile, when you have the low band spectrum and the mid band spectrum, you get a whole host of new devices. And so, T-Mobile is going to be in a position to continue to put new devices out in the market, and leveraging the SA core, the standalone core, allows those devices to travel between different spectrum bands. So you're going to get the best available connection for your device anywhere that you are, which you can't do on a non-standalone core.
Yeah, it's so exciting to hear you say that because I think we talk a lot about this differentiated experience and this differentiated delivery timetable that we've had with 5G, and it's been really neat to see technologies like standalone hit the market and immediately have impacts. I think there was something like a 30% increase in our coverage footprint when we launched standalone 5G. simply because of the facts that you talked about. So it's really neat to see these things go from being talked about in rhetoric and up on whiteboards to actually being in the market and watching customers using it on their phones.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, you guys have just been amazing to work with. So thank you for giving us the opportunity. And the I love Uncarrier. It's a slogan and so on. But when we go out and get to break down doors and do new things, things that are hard, like what we've rolled out, it really puts more behind the slogan. So definitely seen that in terms of the culture. I mean, frankly, I've tried to have some of that rub off on our teams. I mean, we do talk about lowering barriers and so on. So it's been really cool.
Yeah, it's a great partnership, and I think I think we wouldn't be in a lot of places where we are today without great partnerships like this one. Um, Kishen, I mentioned at the top that you are a serial entrepreneur, and I know that you've got a day job at Cisco that keeps you really, really busy. But like, what do you got? What else do you have going on? What are some of the side projects that you're at least thinking about or actually doing something about?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was in startups for about 15 years before I came to Cisco, via the BroadHop acquisition, like you mentioned. I didn't, I frankly didn't expect to stay at Cisco as long as I have. But one of the things you get addicted to is being able to, not only be disruptive but also make a big impact. I mean, frankly, a startup is not going to be who T-Mobile is going to choose to build their 5G SA core. But when you have the scale of Cisco behind you, the sort of the magnitude of the disruption and impact, really increases. So that's really been cool from a career life cycle, or career evolution point of view, is just to see that you have yourself pegged as, oh well, I'm this, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a disruptor. I could never, saddle up to a corporate job or whatever. And what I think you actually end up dropping some of your dogmas and your preconceived notions about, your own labels, if you will. But with that being said, I still really enjoy mentoring and coaching with startups. I mean, so I have 3 different startups I'm working with right now, and they really run the gamut. One is doing, basically taking connected self. If you think about Strava, or even your iPhone, it sends you your weekly stats in terms of your screen time and so on. This is sort of an area called connected self. Think about marrying that together with meeting technology. So in a private and confidential way, getting voice recordings of your meetings that are anonymized, and it shows how much time you're talking versus how much time I'm talking, whether or not I'm screwing around on my my PC, not listening. It's basically taking that sort of Strava mentality of connected self and applying it to how do I be more productive, how do I show up better, and learn more about how do I work. And then there's another one I'm looking at that is helping with methane mitigation. So it's using a patented laser technology to detect when there's gas leaks, which is it's really costly. It's bad for the environment, and it's a huge both public health and public relations nightmare for for oil and gas companies. So that one's being incubated out of the University of Colorado, and is just something it's totally out of left field from my normal stuff, but that's been really neat. And then I work with students at my alma mater at Colorado College. We have a creativity and innovation department, if you will, which is really about. It's more than a lot of colleges have these kind of startup competitions, and it's like a pre-VC feeder, and it ends up being I mean, frankly speaking, like a lot of white guys from private schools who are already really well set up to to do well in the startup world or in the venture world. And we've kind of flipped the model on its head with creativity and innovation at Colorado College to basically break down what makes you successful as an innovator, or what makes you successful as a creative. It's having these. So we've built the curriculum in a way where they're building blocks, but it's being a risk taker, being willing to be vulnerable, being a strong communicator, all those kinds of things that, then not only play into success in, entrepreneurial fields, but also, starting up nonprofit organizations or, even just in, traditional creative avenues. So that's been really cool too, just to see how, somehow entrepreneurship and innovation need to be up leveled for today's world.
That's amazing. Half of that is amazing, and half of it makes me feel bad because, like, my side project now is being the home IT guy at the Katz house, fixing printers and PCs while kids are going to school. So now I feel like I'm not doing nearly enough. So thanks for that. But no, that's amazing, and I am particularly excited about what you're doing to encourage entrepreneurship, particularly technology entrepreneurship, in my home state, which in Colorado, which I think is super exciting. One of the things that you've mentioned it a couple of times. You've mentioned the idea, particularly for entrepreneurs, startups, the idea of taking risks and failing, presumably failing fast. When you're working with startups like the ones that you're working with, what are some of those kind of core pieces of advice that you see make the difference between a really successful startup venture versus the ones that don't see as much success, that don't get purchased by Cisco?
Yeah, I mean, Mike, I think it applies to startups, but it also applies to our customers out there who are trying to figure out how to use 5G and how to be, that next killer app that, admittedly, we've already said that we don't have all those answers. And, number one, the principal aspect is to focus on burning needs. Okay, so look across, if you're an existing organization or if you're an entrepreneur who, is looking to play in a particular space, you really need to think deeply about what's the unmet need or what's the problem that I'm trying to solve, and basically find a better way to do things. And then, don't fall prey to analysis paralysis. You got to start fast. As soon as you have, enough of an idea of what you're doing, go run an experiment. If that experiment goes well, make the experiment a little bigger. If that goes well, then consider some kind of limited production rollout. And also, create agency and enrollment of other stakeholders in your process. Like, keep telling, you got to evangelize. You got to tell people what you're doing, make them want to be part of the momentum that you're creating. And then, you mentioned not being afraid to fail. I think that's, it's sort of a cliche, but it's obviously true. But the last point that I want to say is just focus on the people. So anytime you're getting into, trying to solve a big problem, it takes a team. And when you're building that team, really think about the strengths of the team, the needs of the team, what your different players can bring to the table. I'm a fan of basketball, the NBA, and I love it when there's a team that's stacked with superstars. Well, I'm a Nuggets fan, right? So I'll pick on the LA Clippers, right? We've taken them to a game 7, and they're stacked with superstars, but the Nuggets have this, they know their roles, they're cohesive in terms of the way that they play. And they have different strengths on that team. So I guess we'll see what happens in Game 7. But the team and the strengths-based approach to people is absolutely critical.
Yeah, it takes a lot of self-awareness too, right, to be able to do that, because you have to know what you're good at, so you can make sure you surround yourself with people that round out your own skill set. I think it's great advice. And Kishen, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you doing this with us, and even more, I can't tell you how much we appreciate the partnership with T-Mobile, and specifically your contributions to what's happening in this country with 5G. That I really believe is going to create another huge wave of innovation, create lots of new entrepreneurial opportunities, and lots of new commercial opportunities for entrepreneurs everywhere. So thank you for what you're doing there. Thank you for spending some time helping us break down 5G a little bit, particularly for what it's going to mean to businesses big and small here over the next couple of years. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike. It was awesome. Keep fighting the good fight, and we're just getting started. So I can't wait.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you to all of you for listening. Please come back soon for our next episode of Taking Care of Business. Have a great day.